What is up, Bitcoiners? This is CK, and I am super excited about this panel and this content with this absolutely fantastic group of Bitcoin contributors and community members. I'd like to pass it off to my co-host, Aaron Van Wirdum, and then we're going to introduce each of these individual gentlemen one by one. But Aaron, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Aaron Van Wirdum, co-host and technical editor at Bitcoin Magazine.
Awesome. And so we have three experts in the area of Schnorr, Taproot, and Bitcoin in general. I am really excited to have this all-star lineup, but let's start off by introducing the only man without a camera, Chris Belcher. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Hello there. I've been working mostly on Bitcoin privacy for a couple of years, and right now I'm working on implementing CoinSwap in a practical system to improve Bitcoin's privacy.
Awesome. And let's go next to Andrew Poelstra.
Hey, I'm the director of research at Blockstream. I've been involved trying to get Schnorr signatures into Bitcoin for almost as long as we've been thinking about Schnorr signatures. I guess 6-7 years now. I was involved in the early days, very early days of Taproot, coming up with a high-level idea, and then it sort of ran off without me. And it looks like it's finally getting close to something real. So I've been circling back, and I'm real excited to finally use all the cool stuff I've been hoping for.
Awesome. And then last but not least, let's jump over to Adam. Why don't you introduce yourself, Adam?
Hi, I'm Adam Gibson, Waxwing on the internet, and I also do work on Bitcoin privacy and and know some things about Schnorr and Taproot, but pretty much a strict subset of what Andrew knows. So I may offer some side commentary, but maybe not the main event.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure that compared to the greater population, you are definitely in the top 1% of people who know a thing or two about Taproot. And without further ado, I think Andrew, you teased this a little bit, but today was a really exciting morning Taproot and for I guess moving those features forward with Taproot being integrated into the most recent version of Bitcoin Core. Who wants to jump into giving some commentary on that merge?
I can. So I should maybe tamp down expectations, or maybe I shouldn't. So the story is that we merged Taproot into Bitcoin Core. Maybe when you see that as a headline, it's super exciting, right? It means we got Taproot, like it's happening. It's really happening, guys. But typically, what happens with changes, with large changes, with small changes, anything that's a fork, is that Core will merge the actual supporting code, the actual code that does Taproot, in a major release. In this case, I think it's 0.21. But we won't merge the code that actually does the activation until later, until like 0.21.1 or 21.2 or whatever. The reason being that every time there's a new major version, that's potentially a pretty big deal for people to support. Maybe the dependencies changed, maybe the RPCs changed, maybe I don't know, something changed, and people have to do some integration work. So we don't want to throw all that integration work at them at the same time as suddenly they have to deal with new consensus soft fork. So while Taproot is in Core, the code that activates Taproot is not, meaning that as of today, the exciting news as of today doesn't actually set in motion the arrival of Taproot the way that we might hope. So then the follow-up question, that maybe the natural question is, well, when will we merge the activation code? And there's an even earlier question you should ask is, when will we decide what the activation code looks like? And try as I might, I'm not really a core developer. I don't work on Bitcoin Core day to day. I sort of work at the edges. I've asked a few people, yeah.
Before we get to that point, and we will get to that point.
Okay, all right.
I want to ask: is there any practical benefit of the merge right now? Like, will it now be able to be tested on testnet, or is there any sort of thing that changes in the world?
So that's a good question. I don't know if there is like an option or something to enable it on testnet. I hope that there is. Certainly, if you know C++, it'll be like a 1 or 2 line diff if there's not an option to do it. The benefit of having it merged is that the code is stable. This is really a symbolic, like, we're not going to change what Taproot is, we're not going to change what the code looks like. But everybody writing wallets preemptively to support Taproot can actually write against a target that is not going to change out from under them. Everybody who wants to test it on a reg test or testnet now has a target that's not going to move for them to launch those networks. For my part, as putting my Blockstream hat on, we would like to pull Taproot into Liquid. There are a few changes we need to make for Liquid specific things, but now we have a target to pull in. We've been very hesitant to try to work on Taproot on Liquid because there's a lot of integration work on our end, and if we do that and then things change and then Core is doing something else, then we've got to redo a bunch of stuff. So basically, for people doing supporting work, for people doing dependent work for Taproot, this gives them a target to aim for.
Right.
Else, then
so like you said, the specification isn't going to change now. This is sort of set in, well, I guess not set in stone, but like this is a signal that this is what it's going to be. So let's talk about then, what is it going to be? Adam, you mentioned something about let's see.
Oh.
Yeah, I just want to discuss what Taproot means. Like, what does it do?
Yeah. You want me to kick this off, or?
Yeah, you put.
Maybe Andrew should. But Andrew's going to say a lot if we go strictly by who knows the most. I think Andrew's going to be saying a lot today.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk, but I should let Adam have the mic for a bit.
No, Andrew, you go ahead. I think you should start because you know the history of how Taproot started. Like you were a big part of it, so.
Right. So I have a very short answer to what is Taproot.
Well, we can start with Schnorr maybe. What is Schnorr?
What is Schnorr? We can start with that. That's a fun question. It's a little bit low level. It's a little bit invisible to ordinary users. So what Schnorr is a replacement for the digital signature algorithm that is used in Bitcoin script. So right now we use this algorithm called ECDSA. which is a cryptographic digital signature algorithm that is used by some smart cards, used by various authentication schemes in the wider world, as well as being used in Bitcoin to authenticate transactions. The idea is in Bitcoin, if you own some coins, what you actually own are the secret key corresponding to a public key that the network knows the coins are associated to. And to spend them, you need to sign a transaction by producing a signature. Using the secret key, the network using the public key can check that the signature is valid and therefore the transaction is valid. The Schnorr is a replacement, a drop-in replacement for ECDSA. Schnorr signatures are a little bit smaller. In principle, they're the same size, they're the same data, but there's just ECDSA, we use some standard encoding for ECDSA that was not the most efficient thing. And with Schnorr, we were able to rectify that. Schnorr is a bit easier to verify. In particular, it's much more efficient to batch verify. So if you have a whole pile of Schnorr signatures, like say you're validating the entire blockchain because you're a new Bitcoin user, or say you're validating a large transaction in real time and there's a lot of signatures on it, you can batch these all up, where basically you take all the signatures, you combine them in kind of a randomized way where you throw some randomization in to make sure that nobody's gaming the way that you're combining these. And then you verify the combined Schnorr signature almost like it was a single Schnorr signature, or almost like it was a bunch of half Schnorr signatures, say. So you get, depending on the size of your batch, you get somewhere from like a 2x, well, from a 20% speed up to like a 10 times speed up, say. Like really, it varies a lot based on the size of your batch. But for a typical transaction, you probably get about a 2x speed up in verification speed. And then finally, Schnorr signatures are a bit easier to reason about in two senses. One is it's easier to build stuff onto them, like scriptless scripts or some other stuff that maybe we'll talk about later, multi-signatures and so forth. The other is just verifying that the signatures are secure. We have this notion of provable security that we care about in cryptography. It's kind of an academic notion of proving mathematically that the only way to forge a signature is to solve some difficult problem that everyone in the world thinks is hard. Say solving the discrete logarithm problem is a classic one that we care about. And the reduction from forging ECDSA signatures to solving this hard problem is on kind of philosophically shakier ground than the same reduction for Schnorr, say. So we have more confidence in a philosophical academic sense that Schnorr signatures are secure than what we have for ECDSA. And I'm being a little bit cagey here because the security property for both of them, realistically, is that ECDSA has been deployed in real life for some 20, 30 years and nobody's broken them. It's been deployed on Bitcoin forever and nobody's broken them. If ECDSA is secure, then Schnorr is secure. I mean, they're similar enough. Schnorr is sort of ECDSA without a bunch of crap in it. So like really the security argument is that like this stuff works in practice, like nobody's broken it. But certainly philosophically speaking, there's an argument that you want this notion of provable security. And in that case, Schnorr is on much better footing than ECDSA is.
Wouldn't you also say, Andrew, though, that there's lots of little funny edge cases because of the slight complexity of ECDSA's design? You know, you can find these weird edge cases. Like, do you remember that funny case where somebody published what they claimed was a signature on a Satoshi key, right? And it turned out that what they were doing, they were abusing the concept of ECDSA's algorithm, where they just sort of generated the message hash after the fact. So it wasn't actually a hash of a message that they'd constructed. And there's a number, I remember looking this up, there's 3 or 4 weird fiddly little cases. I mean, it's all because of the algebraic construction being more complex, right?
Yeah. So one way you can maybe characterize this is to say that ECDSA is a secure signature, but it's not a secure strong signature, and that's a term of art that means it's not malleable. Like ECDSA is malleable, as we know, although we tightened that up in BIP 62, 66 many years ago. But the other thing is that while ECDSA is a signature, it is not a proof of knowledge. A Schnorr signature is not only a secure signature, secure strong signature, it's a zero knowledge proof of knowledge of the secret key, which technically speaking is something very very technical and difficult to grasp. But on a high level, what this means is that when you're producing a Schnorr signature, your hands are kind of tied. You're forced to use your secret key material in an appropriate way. You're forced to use a message in an appropriate way. And if you try to start the algorithm halfway through, which is kind of a way to describe what I think one of Craig Wright's grad students was the one who made this fake signature. You try to start the algorithm halfway through by sort of just like sticking random data in place of a hash kind of thing, and then pretending that's a message, even though there's no message. You'll find that you can't do it. There's just the Schnorr, the formula.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? You didn't mention key prefix Schnorr. There's a zero knowledge, proof of knowledge of the secret key,
yes.
right?
Oh my goodness, you're right. This is how sloppy I get. So Schnorr's signature algorithm, as defined by Schnorr in 1990, is not a zero knowledge proof of knowledge. When we talk about Schnorr in the Bitcoin world, we're referring to actually a variant of Schnorr, where you're signing, not only are you signing a message, but you're also signing your own public key. And that's something important for like Taproot, for BIP32, for any context where you have public keys that are not inherently authenticated in any way, and where we're often doing things where we're tweaking the keys, where we take a key and then we find related keys and stuff. So everything Bitcoin related does stuff like this. Like Bitcoin is just full of these ephemeral keys that are related to each other in mysterious ways. And being a secure signature is not sufficient to be secure in that kind of environment. You want this proof of knowledge property. And that's what this key prefixed Schnorr variant that we talk about, that's the property that it has.
So to ask a very concrete question, does Taproot, as implemented right now, change Bitcoin security model in any way?
Does it affect the security model of Bitcoin?
Yes.
No. So the security model of Bitcoin is assuming that we can model SHA-2 as a random oracle, meaning that the hash function kind of looks random in some like philosophically weaselly sense, where like you're not allowed to look at like how you implement SHA-2. It's like if somehow we like remove the part of your brain that was able to read the SHA-2 source code, it would then look random to you. So if that's true, whatever I mean by that, and if the discrete logarithm problem is hard, then everything in Bitcoin is secure. That's sort of the target. That's our security model. And so Taproot, so ECDSA, we believe is secure in that model. Schnorr signatures are secure in that model. There's actually secure proof of knowledge in that model, which is something that we don't obviously have for ECDSA. And then Taproot, which is actually a few things wrapped around Schnorr, sort of this where you take a public key and you tweak it to commit to a Merkle tree of different script paths. That is also secure in this model. We're still in this random oracle elliptic curve discrete log problem model. So no new security assumptions. No new security assumptions, and there's not even a significant increase in the complexity of any of the code implementing this. We're not creating like elaborate towers constructions. We're just taking basically the same stuff that we already have, and we're rearranging it in a slightly cleaner way to get Taproot.
Right. So what does Taproot make possible now that, well, let's say it activates, right? What then becomes possible on Bitcoin that's not possible today? What are the new things we can do if Taproot makes it into the product?
So this might be a better question for Chris or for Adam, as they're doing like wallet development kind of stuff. The short answer is
So one example of a thing that makes possible is it's not really about things which aren't possible before, but how much they're hidden. So right now, if you want to do a 2 of 2 multisig on Bitcoin, you generally, unless you do something quite complicated, you have to actually have the 2 public keys and the 2 signatures on the blockchain, which means everyone can see them. Or if for example, there's a 2 of 3 signature, you can tell which of the 2 keys actually signed the transaction. And that leaks all kinds of information. So I remember reading about, there was a certain custodial wallet which had 3 of 5, and people could tell that some of the time these 3 keys signed the signature, and other times these other keys signed the signature, which moved their funds. And when if these wallets were implemented with Schnorr signatures, you could make all of that disappear. You could make there would only be one single signature on the blockchain, and you couldn't even tell if it was multisig or if it was single sig, and you couldn't tell unless you wanted to which particular key is signed. So that's one way it greatly improves privacy. And that has like a second, a side effect of that is, for example, with detecting change addresses. So right now in Bitcoin, if you spend coins, you generally have a change output. It's analogous that if you're, I don't know, if you want to buy something that costs 15 euros and you give a 20 euro note, then you get the 5 euros back. So that is a privacy leak, because on the blockchain you can see the different amounts, you can see the different conditions that affect the coin. So what I mean concretely, if you have this wallet which is 2 of 3 multisig or 2 of 2 multisig, and you pay someone, that money is going to a single signature, and the change goes back to another 2 of 2 multisig. So anyone looking at this transaction can say, okay, so the money used to be in a 2 of 2 multisig, and this other stuff goes to a single sig, and this third output goes to a 2 of 2 multisig. So clearly the ones which are both multisig are the same wallet. Now, if these were all using Schnorr, then that would be much more difficult to do. That would be one, it would fix one way of detecting change outputs.
Right. So that's a Schnorr specific privacy benefit then, right?
Yeah.
Are there any other? So are there any other examples? Anyone?
Yeah, there's scriptless scripts. Well, possibly, I mean, someone else can talk if they want, but it's a way of essentially doing, so in Lightning we have hash time lock contracts. It's a way of changing the ownership of money based on if there's a hash value which has been revealed or if a certain time has passed. And a side effect of that is if your wallet sends a Lightning payment and it routes over many different hops, each of these hops will see the same hash value. So because they'll see the same hash value, they'll know that they're part of the same route, the payment route, Alice pays to Bob, pays to Charlie, so on. Mm-hmm. Now, the thing with scriptless scripts, and they're, just to remind people, they're enabled by Schnorr signatures. They're essentially required by Schnorr signatures. They would mean that each of these hops no longer has exactly the same value. Instead, the point, it's called a point now, a point time locked contract. The number they see is different in each of the hops, and the numbers can't be associated with each other. So if I'm Alice and I pay someone, hop my Lightning payment over Bob and Charlie and Bob won't know that they're part of the same route because of scriptless scripts.
So it's really a privacy thing, with inside the network. It's, the different participants from the hops, can't really see the other side of it. Is that correct?
Yeah, they can't. What the situation is right now, if they were talking to each other, if Bob and Charlie, the people in the hops, were colluding, they could tell they were part of the same hop. And therefore they'd know, they could say, I don't know, the last one in the route could say, okay, I know that I paid this service, and if he's colluding with the first one, the route, they could together figure out the source and destination of this payment. Because they have the same hash value, because it's the same number, it's the same data. Well, with Schnorr signatures, that's no longer possible.
So kind of building on that, really, it seems as though there are things that are already built on Bitcoin right now, DLCs are kind of coming out, Lightning Network. A lot of these things are significantly improved by the introduction of Schnorr signatures as well as other capabilities from Taproot. Can you guys think about some of the, I guess, higher constructs that are being built that are kind of dependent on this upgrade going through, and people are counting on this functionality in order to do even greater things within Bitcoin? Does that question even make sense?
Yeah, you're essentially asking, is there something which is not possible today but is possible if we get Schnorr?
Yeah, that's
well,
what I'm asking.
Schnorr and Taproot.
With Taproot. Taproot's a bit bigger than Schnorr.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So maybe one example could be like a 50 of 100 multisig, where you have 100 public keys and 50 of them need to sign to move the money. That's not really possible today.
Yeah,
I remember thinking about that case. Isn't there some problematic area where if you have like M of n and M is small, like 1 or 2 out of 100, obviously no worries, right? And if you have 99 out of 100, then maybe no worries. But combinatorially, if it's 50 out of 100, if you're using like scripts, we haven't actually talked about how Taproot works. Can I just, maybe we should rewind. There might be people listening who don't actually know what Taproot is, because we talked about Schnorr a bit, right?
Yeah, you're right.
Before we start getting into applications and how they work, we kind of need to, do you not think? Yeah.
Well, good.
Yeah. Well, that's Andrew's department, I've decided.
All right. So what is Taproot? Taproot is, at the most basic level, it's a way to take a signing key, like a signing public key, and tweak it so that it is a commitment to some sort of script data. And when you turn it into a commitment, you don't actually increase its size or change anything visible about it. This is kind of the cool thing. So the thinking here is that under normal circumstances, well, let's just look at a normal Bitcoin wallet. You just got all of your coins correspond to single keys, right? To spend the coins, you need to use a signing key corresponding to those public keys. So all the cool things that Bitcoin script can do, all these multisigs and thresholds and stuff like this, never even come into play. So ideally, you would want something that that was really optimized for the single key case. Now, sort of a cool observation is, as Chris was saying, even if you have multiple participants, you can do multi-signatures and so forth using Schnorr signatures, such that what hits the blockchain is still a single signature. You sort of have one key that represents the whole group of participants, and if everyone is cooperating, they're able to produce a signature with that single key. And so once we have Schnorr signatures, this one key, one signature model actually covers a whole lot of stuff. It's not only like ordinary wallets, but it's also multi-sig wallets and threshold wallets and stuff. But as soon as you get into these multi-party scenarios, you typically have to think about how you're going to back out of the protocol if there are actors who drop out or they're malicious or something like that. There's this mechanism for doing multi-party coin movements called claim or refund, where basically, say that you're doing like a Lightning HTLC as one common example of this. The way this works is that all the participants, there would just be two participants in a single payment channel. They put their coins up into a multisig output. So an output that a Bitcoin transaction output that can only be spent if the two of them agree to actually move the coins. And so there's a worry here for whoever's putting up the most money or any money at all. What if the counterparty disappears? You don't want to put your coins into a 202 output and then find that now your counterparty is holding them ransom or they're gone or something and the coin gets burned. So the way that all these protocols work is that the script you use isn't just checking a couple signatures. It's checking a couple signatures and has this additional clause where after the coins have been sitting still for a certain amount of time, the network will sort of assume something's gone wrong and say, well, there's an alternate key that you're allowed to use to spend the coins. So whoever puts the money up is putting them in control of the 202 output, but they know that after 10 or 100 or 1,000 blocks, that the coins will then be under their own control again. So they no longer need to worry about this risk that their counterparty is going to disappear on them. And the way you do this in Bitcoin script is you write out there are a few ways. You can do an if statement. Say, you can say if the user provides a 0, then check the signature, check multiple signatures. If the user provides a 1, then check that enough time has gone by, and then check a single signature with the original user's key. On a high level, though, what's going on here is that you have a sort of cooperative case where everyone involved, in this case is just two people, agrees to produce a signature. And so they produce a signature. And you've got an uncooperative case that under optimal circumstances, an optimistic case just like is never used at all. So the cool thing Taproot does is, and this is actually how Taproot was originally invented, was we were thinking about ways that we could hide the uncooperative case, like behind a hash or something, and only reveal it in the case that it was needed. And the hope would be that usually it's never needed. So now your transactions look like it's a public key that represents the optimistic case, and then it's a hash that represents whatever goes wrong. And usually the hash just stays a hash. If something goes wrong, then it's revealed like actually it's a hash of this script, and the script has these keys. These keys have these signatures, and so on. So with Taproot, we kind of combine these into one. We can try to hide the hash inside of the public key. It's kind of this cool trick where you take the key and you hash up whatever your actual script is alongside the public key. This is very similar to what key prefix Schnorr looks like, actually. And algebraically, it's almost identical. It's kind of spooky. Like move the equal sign to a different part of the equation, and then you've got Taproot. And now you've got a single key, which is itself a commitment to a script. And so now imagine you've got this HDLC scenario where you've got a couple participants who are, in the optimistic case, they've got a key and they just want a signature with it. Then you can have on the blockchain just a single key and a single signature. And in the case that something goes wrong, those participants will say, oh, well, actually, here's some backup script, and here's a proof that actually if you hash this backup script with this other key, that you get the first key. So secretly, this public key that we were pretending was a public key, secretly it was a commitment the whole time to this script. And if you don't need that script, then you never reveal this. So this validation model where you don't care as a validator whether there's one participant or if there's multiple participants is now extended to you don't care if there's one participant or multiple participants and there's a backup clause or multiple participants and there's like a whole bunch of different options for spending the coins. Suddenly in the optimistic case, these all look identical. And we can actually go one further here, which is rather than committing to a backup script, we actually commit to what's called a Merkle tree of different backup scripts. So if you as a script designer have like 100 different backup conditions, depending on like who happens to be available and how much time has gone by and whatever your legal policy is when you map it into script conditions, then you can create a giant tree which contains all of your different conditions. And then you can prove that any one, when you actually use one of the conditions, you can reveal that one condition in a fairly short proof and not reveal any of the other conditions. And in fact, you don't even reveal how many other conditions there are. So in the super optimistic case, you don't reveal anything. It just looks like the key. Nobody knows that there are any conditions. Nobody knows how many participants. Nobody knows anything. In the unhappy case, then you reveal one specific condition, one specific backup condition without revealing what the others are or whether there are others or how many of the others that there are. So that's what Taproot is, basically. It's a way to take a key and hide backup conditions in the key under the assumption that usually the key is actually all you need, even in complicated things, even with HDLCs and so forth. And then what Chris was talking about with scriptless scripts and so on, those get you those let you avoid using the backup script even in more interesting scenarios, which is kind of a cool thing. Those let you do like the exchange of hash preimages that HDLC require, which ordinarily would require script, meaning you'd have to use a backup case, you'd have to reveal a script. With scriptless scripts, you avoid this. So you can do HDLCs, and it's just one key, one signature, unless something goes wrong. So that's what Taproot is.
Yeah, so I guess the main benefits then are, first of all, privacy, because you, at least in the cooperative case, you don't need to reveal all of the different ways the money could have been spent, which is also better for scaling because it's more compact that way. And then what Adam was touching on is that there are even more benefits because now you can make bigger multisigs, for example. Right? That's where you were getting at.
Yeah. So I can elaborate. Or
no, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So there are a few different ways to do multi-signatures. So if you have a set of participants and you want them all to produce a signature, this is actually typically what we mean by multi-signatures. We also have a variant where maybe you have a set of participants and you only need like quorum many of them. Maybe you have like 3 participants and you just need 2 of them to sign off, or what we call those threshold signatures. And usually in Bitcoin or Swap, we just say multi-signature for everything. But technically, there are important differences in how they're implemented. So if you're doing the multi-signature, where you have M of M, same letter there, you just want all your participants to be signing, then there are sort of 2 ways you can do this. You can do the Schnorr multi-signature way, where everybody produces a joint key, a single key, and then when they want to sign, they all do an interactive protocol and produce a single signature. And then the benefit of that is for privacy. You get, you no longer reveal how many participants because it's just one key, one signature. You also get scalability or the transaction cost benefit, which is great. But the cost of this is that you have to do it interactively. everybody's keys have to be online. And there's a slight asterisk to this that maybe I'll circle back to related to Music too, but I don't. Maybe I won't. I'm not going to now. But you need all your keys to be online. And this is problematic in some scenarios. So if you are doing a multi-sig of a bunch of people who have their keys like in a safe or something, then it's maybe a big deal for them to go open the safe. Maybe they need a key. Maybe they need somebody else who has a key to unlock it at the same time. Maybe there's like a whole process in getting these keys out. So if you require all of your participants to be doing this at the same time, then that's a huge logistical barrier to actually using these signatures. So there's another way that you can do multi-sig, kind of the old school Bitcoin way, where you have this opcode called check multisig. And in Taproot, we actually have a different opcode called check sig add, which does basically the same thing in a more verifier-friendly way and a more batch verification-friendly way. And there you just list everybody's individual public keys, and the opcode checks that there's a signature corresponding to every single public key. Just check all of the signatures at once. And so the trade-off there is that you no longer need interactivity. Everybody can go to their safe on their own time, on their own schedule, and get a signature. And then in the end, they just each put their signatures separately into the transaction. But the cost, of course, is privacy, because now you're revealing everyone's individual keys, and of course, scalability, because you're revealing all these individual signatures, and you've got to pay for that, right? Your transaction fee is going to have to cover that. When we move from, so there's the trade-off just for multi-signatures. When you go from multi-signatures into threshold signatures, things get more interesting.
Andrew, just before you go on to threshold, your point about the non-scalability of using, say, opt check sig add, isn't it somewhat offset by using Merkle paths? It depends on the case, doesn't it?
It does. So I'm gonna have to go to threshold signatures to talk about that.
Okay.
But very briefly, I can touch on that. So what's cool about using check sig add is that there really isn't a meaningful difference between the multi-sig case and the threshold case, right? The opcode, what it checks is that there are enough signatures. And if enough means all the signers, okay, you've got a multi-sig. But if enough means like 3 out of 5 or 2 out of 3, then you've got a threshold signature. And you can sort of imagine that as a Bitcoin verifier, the difference between, enough being a quorum, a threshold amount, and enough being all of them, there's not really, technically there's not much of a difference. And this is why we're so sloppy about terminology, because threshold is threshold. So what so there are a few different strategies though for assembling threshold signatures now. And the reason is that while the check sig add strategy is basically that there's no distinction between doing threshold and non-thresholds, what's actually morally happening is that the set of possible ways the transaction can be satisfied is growing combinatorially. So then let me try to elaborate on that without using combinatorics. Can I do it? Maybe. Yes.
Well, okay.
No, not really, but I can give some small examples, and then we'll see how to generalize. If you require 3 out of 3 signatures, then there's only one way the transaction can be satisfied. All 3 signatures have to be present. Okay. Mm-hmm. If you require 2 out of 3 signatures, so you've got 3 participants, and let's say that Andrew, Adam, and Chris. Okay, so the 3 of us want to produce a transaction, and now we say that there's actually the rule, rather than being all 3 of us, it's 2 out of 3. There's actually 3 different ways that can happen. Me and Adam can sign, or me and Chris can sign, or Adam and Chris can sign. Okay? And so those 3 different ways actually represent the number 3 choose true. 3 choose 2, which is a binomial coefficient. So we're getting into combinatorics here. What the interesting property of these numbers are is that if you're looking at large thresholds, say k of n, then the number of possible spending paths is going to be n choose k. And whenever k is close to 0, or k is close to n, these are fairly small. It turns out that n choose 1 is always n for every possible value of n, right? So if we've got like 3 of us and only one of us is needed, like obviously however many of us, like we each could produce a signature, right? So in the 3 case, you know, there are 3 participants. If we only one of us, there are 3 choices. Similarly, if we require n-1 signatures, then we kind of invert the situation. Now we choose one of us to not be included. And so again, there are n possibilities. And then it turns out if you look at n choose 2 or n choose n-2, then you get roughly n squared possibilities. And if you choose it, you need 3 signatures, it looks like n cubed, and 4, it looks like n to the 4, and so on. And these are all like actually divided by some amount, so it's not quite growing as bad as I'm describing, but it's pretty much growing as badly as I'm describing it. So you can imagine now having a 50 of 100 multisig, say. And so the number of possibilities for the sets of signers who might provide signatures is 100 choose 50. And that, if you believe that the heuristic I just gave you, is on the order of 100 to the power of 50 inside. Okay, so that's 1 with 100 0. That's actually a Google many possibilities, which is a very large number. You cannot fit a Google of anything onto the blockchain or onto anything in the known universe. It's just too big.
I'm going to be annoying for a moment and say that
Yeah.
n choose 4 is not n to the 4th if n is 5, but you sort of you were
It's
just
much bigger.
missing. Yeah, of course. I just wanted to be annoying for a second.
No, that's a good point. So
That's my habit.
It grows the way I'm describing up to the halfway point, and then it turns around and starts shrinking in exactly the way. You're right. That's a good point. Yeah. So for 100, you know, if you're choosing 1, it's 100. If you're choosing 2, it's 10,000. If you're choosing 3, it's 1,000,000. Choosing 4, it keeps going 100 to the 100, whatever, until you get to 50. Then you're at 100 to the 50, and then it actually turns around and starts going 100 to the 49, 100 to the 48, 100 to 47, all the way back down until you're at 100 choose 99. And again, there's only 100 possibilities. You're just choosing one person to not include. So if you are, it's a low battery. I'm gonna have to plug in a sec. If you are using check SIGAD or the old school check multisig opcode, you don't really need to think about all these different possibilities, because the way that we verify it is actually pretty straightforward. You say, do I have 50 signatures? Are those 50 signatures for, you know, like keys that are actually in this giant list of 100? Okay, then great. If not, not so great. And it's very easy to check that very efficiently by just checking each signature against each key in a row. But there are a couple other ways that you might do this, and I'm gonna what order do I want to say these things in? One thing you could do actually is there is a variant of the multisig, the Schnorr multisig protocol that I've been describing that works with thresholds, where you add even more interaction and you add some like surprising complications to your security model related to people trying to grief the protocol, and you add a bunch of complicated code, and possibly you add some new security functions. And the result is you can do this interactive protocol where you do like a 50 of 100, you have 100 keys, and any 50 of those key holders can come together and do some like interactive protocol and produce a single signature that represents all 100 participants. Kind of a cool thing. Any set of 50 can do that. And so you can do thresholds in this way, and you retain the one key, one signature validation model, which is awesome. But the cost of that is even more interaction, and you've got a more complicated, much more complicated code to deal with, and a much more complicated security model to work. So there are good reasons that you maybe don't want to do this, even though it's technically possible. And maybe as you know, our implementation mature, these reasons will become less important. But right now, like, you're kind of in no man's land, writing your own threshold signature, planning code. It's a scary thing. Try to avoid it. So another thing you could do though, and this is kind of cool, is you could say, well, let's look at these n choose k different subsets. So in the example with me and Adam and Chris, what if we just had a joint key, like a multi-signature for all of us? What if Adam and I had a combination key, and Chris and I had a combination key, and Adam and Chris had a combination key? And now these three different possibilities, these 3 choose 2 different possibilities, represent 3 choose 2 different public keys. And for each of those keys, the 2 required participants are able to just jointly do this multi-signature protocol, which is much, much simpler than the threshold signature protocol. And in particular, like if Adam and I want to do this protocol, we just choose the key that represents us, we do the protocol, that's great. We don't have to worry about Chris showing up and then like giving us bad data, like pretending he's going to participate and then not participating or anything crazy like that. There's just no room for Chris in the protocol because we're working with our combined key, Adam and I's combined key, and he might as well be some random third party. Like the fact that he was involved in the original setup is kind of irrelevant to the crypto. So if you have, say, a more interestingly sized threshold, say you have like 15...
Hold on, I've got a question from Elliot. Does your earlier example mean there are 3 public keys on the blockchain? Like Adam and Chris, Chris and Andrew, Andrew and...
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's 3 and they're in a Taproot Merkle, 3 aren't they? Right.
Exactly, yeah. So the way we're going to combine this with Taproot is we're actually going to put all 3 keys, because only one of them is going to be used. We're going to put them in different branches of our Merkle tree.
Right.
So now, whichever pair of us actually winds up producing the transaction, we just choose the Merkle branch corresponding to that. And so now we get most of the efficiency benefits and privacy benefits. We're just revealing that there was a key that we used, and we produce a signature with it. And nobody can tell that that key was a combination key. Nobody can tell that there were other keys or how many there were. And so we're hiding, again, we're kind of hiding almost the maximal amount of information. Just by producing a proof, we're kind of revealing that we were doing something funky. But we're not revealing any more than that, is the thing. So suppose we generalize this. And now Adam, I think, has a calculator in front of him. So I'm going to say that 21 choose 15 is about 1 million. And I might be wrong about that, but that's kind of an interesting, I think, if I remember right, it's about 1 million. So you could imagine having a threshold, a 15 out of 21 threshold. And if you were to do this key expanding idea, where you take all 21 choose 15 different possibilities for subsets of signers, you wind up with about 1 million keys, and you can create a Merkle tree with all 1 million different keys in them. And what's cool here is that prior to Taproot, there's not really any meaningful way you could do what I'm describing. You can't put 1 million keys on the blockchain and just have like 1 million keys in your script. Like the script is too big. There are a bunch of limits on how big your script can be that'll get in your way. But what you can do is have a Merkle tree that has 1 million branches in it. And it turns out that you can reveal any one of these 1 million branches, and the size to reveal, you have to produce this proof, and the size of the proof is roughly logarithmic. Every time you double the number of keys, you add 32 bytes to the size of your proof. So 1 million is roughly 2 to the 20. So to reveal 1 out of 1 million different branches, you have to reveal 20 hashes. They're 32 bytes, so that's 640 bytes, say. So rather than having 32 million bytes representing 32 million keys, you now have 640 bytes. And you're able to do this fairly large threshold, and you're able to retain these privacy benefits. You're revealing something funny is going on, perhaps, but you are not revealing what your policy looks like. You're not revealing how many signers there are. You're not revealing what your threshold are. You're not revealing what the other keys are, any of this kind of stuff. And then what's extra cool is because this is hidden inside of a Taproot condition, you can have this like bonus condition where you say, well, actually, we were doing 15 to 21, but suppose we have all 21 participants, then we might as well just let them sign with the root key, and then we reveal nothing at all. So in the extra optimistic case, where you're above your threshold, you actually have all the signers, then you don't reveal any. So finally, to circle back to Adam's original comment, which is that things get kind of hairy. So you can easily create a Merkle tree with 1 million different branches. That's not too hard. You could go up to, say, 1 billion branches, and then maybe your laptop's going to have to run all night. You could do a few billion branches, but you could do it. You can't really go much higher than that. At that point, just producing the tree in the first place is not going to be computationally efficient. And in particular, if you tried to do this Google example, if you tried to do 100 to the 50 different branches, you have no hope of ever producing that tree, no matter what you try. So even though, in theory, you could create this massive tree and it would have only, what is it, Google? About 2 to the 300-ish. So even though it's only 300 layers deep, right? In theory, you could actually fit a proof into this tree onto the blockchain. You can't. In real life, you can't. And actually, this is extra silly because there are less than a Google different public keys. So an equivalent policy to this would be you just like let the signer reveal what key they want to use, and then use it. So that's all true, I guess. But you can tell you can't produce this tree. So Taproot gives you this cool benefit when you are doing thresholds. You can get this really efficient threshold scheme, but it's only efficient when your threshold is either close to 0 or close to the total number of signers, basically. So if you're using a threshold kind of as a backup saying, well, really I want like 100 participants, but if 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 of them are gone, then I'll deal with it. I'll just make it work. Then this form of threshold signature is perfect for you. But if you're actually trying to do like 50 of 100 or even like 70 over 100, then it's hopeless. Then you have to fall back to the check sig add mechanism, or the check multisig mechanism. That was a longer digression than I wanted.
So basically, like democratic systems with 50% thresholds, we don't support them. Yeah.
Right. Well, we support them, but in the same way that we always did, where you have to reveal all the keys and provide an explicit threshold. Right. Taproot doesn't give you any benefit if you're doing this kind of stuff. But if you're doing thresholds near 0 or near your total, then Taproot gives you some pretty big benefits here.
You made some. Go ahead, Chris.
You could use the scheme you were talking about earlier, which has more security assumptions. I think I remember reading about it, which is it looks like Shamer's secrets sharing with the polynomial that that the public keys become part of, and then you can do the big democracy thing with 1,000,000 keys or whatever you're thinking of.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Yes, there is actually a protocol where you can have 50 of 100 keys. The way it works is actually kind of cool. It gives like a quick high-level summary. Watch, it'll be less than 30 seconds, I swear. Where basically, in the example with me and Adam and Chris, if Adam and I want to, if I want the signature to be possible without me, then I split my key up and give a shard of my key to both Adam and to Chris. And Chris gives a shard of his key to both Adam and to me. And Adam gives a shard of his key 50 of 100 to Chris and to me. And so all of us have not only our own key, but we have shards of the other participants' keys. And the way the sharding works is basically using Shamir secret sharing, such that during the signature protocol, the two of us are able to pretend to be the third participant from the perspective of the algebra verifying the signature. And it's a little bit more complicated than that because like you have to make sure that we're sending like consistent data to everybody. We got to make sure that we're not lying. You have to worry about what happens if Adam and I just like collude to reproduce Chris's key. You have to worry, like, what if I'm using the same key in multiple of these protocols, and then I'm giving like shards, one set of shards to some set of people, and a different set of shards to another set of people. And what if sometimes they're the same people and they collude, and what's going on there?
Can I just say it might be worth mentioning to the people who don't like follow all this weird stuff, but all of these protocols are really difficult in our context because we deal with these ephemeral keys. It's not like a lot of the old academic work was based around, there's a bunch of people and they all have their persistent identities and they're registered with some certificate authority or something. And you've got these fixed keys and you can work out protocols. But in Bitcoin, it's really hard because everything is ephemeral. Nothing is set in stone up front.
Yeah, you use a public key once to avoid address reuse.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of things. That's probably the biggest one. I think the difference between the Bitcoin environment and sort of the ideal environment that we historically would think about cryptography proofs. And, the idea that everybody would have like thousands or millions of keys that they're only going to use once, and there's nothing actually tying their identity to those keys in like normal operation. I think if you said that to a cryptographer in 1995, they'd tell you to go back to the future. That's sort of ridiculous.
So one of the things that I think wasn't implemented in this Taproot version is, I remember one of the benefits of Schnorr is that by combining signatures, you can actually make CoinJoins cheaper than regular transactions. Like it would be a cost benefit of using CoinJoin, right? I think that's not implemented. Is it?
That's right. Yeah. So what you're referring to is called signature aggregation, where you can actually, within a transaction, you combine all of the signatures that appear into a single signature, basically using like this interactive multi-signature scheme.
Specifically cross-input signature aggregation,
yes,
right?
Cross-input signature aggregation. Yeah, so using these multi-signatures, you sort of do like within a single input, like you can combine your keys, of course. But with cross-input aggregation, the idea is you just have one signature for the whole transaction. And then if you're doing a CoinJoin or something, that's great because you've got like twice the transaction with no more signature, right? Because you're always combining it. So this would have been great for privacy. It would have really incentivized CoinJoins, as well as reducing the validation load on the network.
Right. So why isn't it in there?
Why isn't it in there? So there are a couple of reasons. Basically because it added too much complexity. So one reason was that by doing this cross-input signature aggregation, we are changing the validation model for Bitcoin transactions. So right now, a transaction is valid if every input is valid. So when you're validating a transaction, you actually just validate every input. And then if any of them fail, the transaction's bad, so you throw it away. When you have cross-input signature aggregation, you can no longer do this. You have to do like sort of a tentative validation of the input, where you say, well, everything was okay except maybe the signature. And the signature I'm going to pull out and like sort of put it into this aggregate. And then after the fact, you validate the aggregate. So just by virtue of doing that, it requires some code architecture changes to parts of the Bitcoin Core consensus code that people were scared to touch. Or rather, that would have increased the review burden much more than anything else in Taproot. And then then there were a bunch of surprising interactions with other things. So one example is it would have turned a lot of soft forks into hard forks. And the reason for this is kind of interesting. The reason is that we have a new soft forking mechanism in Taproot, in the new Tap script, where you can use some opcodes that in Taproot are defined to immediately pass the transaction or immediately pass the input, right? If you hit this as a validator, you just say, oh, I'm not gonna validate any further. You know, this input's good. I'm gonna move on. And the value in that is that later we can soft fork in a rule that says, that transaction, that opcode doesn't actually immediately pass the transaction. Now actually it does something else. And the cool thing is we can literally say it can do whatever we want. We can define it however we want. It can like manipulate the stack. It can like reach into the transaction. It can do all sorts of crazy stuff. And we don't have to worry that whatever surprising things it's doing will somehow give an inconsistent view to modern validators and old validators that haven't updated, right? That's the difference between a soft fork and a hard fork, is that if old validators wind up seeing something different than new validators, then you're in trouble. And you don't have this because old validators will see this. They'll immediately say, oh, I'm not even going to try to validate this. I'm just walking away from this. It's good. Maybe I'm going to signal the user that, people are using this and probably a soft fork has happened. And like, otherwise, kind of weird. But I'm not going to worry about what happens afterwards. If you combine that with signature aggregation, though, cross-input signature aggregation, now you're back to the old view, the old model, though, where old validators see something different. Because when old validators throw up their hands and pass the input, they might skip over additional signatures that appear after that opcode. And so they might have a different aggregate signature than new validators do. So suddenly this cool new soft fork mechanism that we came up with is no longer a cool new soft fork mechanism. It's just, I guess, a cool new hard fork mechanism. So that was unfortunate. And then recovery.
Sounds like you could restrict it to some specific subset of signatures or specific inputs, or it sounds like the thing that you could easily get around, but that's probably just easy to say when you've just heard a high-level description.
I think you could get around it in a way that would be easy in retrospect or obvious in retrospect. I would believe that it's possible to come up with a scheme. But so first off, this invites kind of bike shedding or design paralysis, figuring out what that scheme should look like. And secondly, it was kind of a psychological effect where we found this out so late in the game of working on signature aggregation that we were like, we should not we should not tread where angels dare not or whatever. Because this thing that we thought was like an obvious efficiency CoinJoin incentivizing improvement turned out to have surprising interaction with other parts of the consensus. And that's a scary realization, right? I mean, that's like, we almost forked everything, like kind of fear. And I think that just psyched out a lot of the people doing this kind of design. You have this combo of the design paralysis and like fear of doing design.
I'm not too sure about it really incentivizing CoinJoin because it would actually incentivize any kind of consolidation. So you could imagine if someone has lots of small coins and they consolidate them into one output, they're actually going to pay fewer fees than a CoinJoin, which consolidates many inputs and creates many outputs. Right. So I'm not. I mean, I suppose you'd have to do think about it a lot more, but it's not entirely obvious to me that it only incentivizes CoinJoin. It could incentivize other stuff more.
At the very least, you can say it definitely doesn't preferentially incentivize privacy-preserving CoinJoin, if we think of CoinJoin as the most general concept of combining coins.
Yeah, absolutely. Although that's an interesting observation. There's sort of an argument that maybe if people wrote CoinJoin software that was privacy-preserving, and that was a default. Yeah, that's an interesting observation, right? There are a lot of ways to do CoinJoin that are like not effective, right?
Yeah, you could have lots of outputs which will have different amounts, and then it's easy to separate out the transactions. Another thing is these big CoinJoins with lots of inputs, lots of outputs. They're quite obvious in a way. That it's visible that something funky is going on, and even today people censor that. There have been cases where if you deposit these coins into an exchange, then the user suddenly gets loads more questions about their origin. So I'm not entirely sure that these big transactions are really that good for privacy. That they could do the other things like PayJoin, for example, might be better in some ways.
That's a discussion for another day, though. But it's
that's right. Yeah,
good observation. But
yeah, well, so before we get to activation, which will be the next topic, is there anything else you guys want to mention about what Taproot makes possible that's not possible? Any new applications, any new interesting stuff that people can look forward to?
I'm going to throw one thing in, which is Taproot. So the version of Bitcoin script that we have in Taproot is significantly cleaner than the existing version of script, which is kind of funny because we didn't change any opcodes, except that the signature checking opcodes use Schnorr, of course. And I mentioned that check multisig became check sig add. That's the only change to the opcodes or to the semantics. But what we did clean up were all the different resource limits for the denial of service resource limits in script. So right now, the rules if you're making a script are that you're allowed to have at most 201 non-push opcodes. And so a push opcode is putting data on the stack or putting a number on the stack. You are allowed to have up to 201 of those. There is a limit for how many sig ops you have. I think there's a policy limit on them per transaction, and there's a global limit per block. A sig op here is either a check sig or a check multisig, or a key in a check multisig, unless that check multisig is in an if statement, I think. So the definition of this is sort of an accidental Satoshiism, like it was a C++ code, like was incrementing a counter at kind of arbitrary places, and the result, and then that counter was limited. There are limits to how many items you're allowed to put on the stack. There are limits to how big your stack elements can be. There's one more that I'm missing. I think there might be a limit on your total script size. But the point of view of a series of different limits.
Script size 10,000 bytes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. They have a whole bunch of different limits, and if you hit any of them, then your script is invalid. And so what this means is that if you're working on a project like my project called Miniscript, where you're trying to do generic script kind of stuff, it becomes very difficult to work with generic scripts, or it becomes very difficult to produce scripts in a generic way, in an optimal generic way, because you have this multi-dimensional optimization problem that you're trying to work on. And you've got like these weird non-local things where like compiling one part of your script might cause you to go over a global limit that breaks other parts of your script and so on. So Taproot both relaxes these limits and combines them all into a single limit, which, if I remember correctly, is something like for every check sig opcode, you get like an additional 50 bytes for script size or something like that, where basically the limit that you have to work within when you're generating these scripts is now like a single limit that you're either hitting or not hitting. It grows with the, it sort of scales with the size of your script. And the value of that is that if you're composing a script out of like multiple subscripts, you know that if each of your subscript components satisfy the limit, then the combination of them all will satisfy the limit. So you no longer have these like weird, surprising global effects. So that's a little bit, well, right now it's a bit of an academic thing, but it is going to be a practical thing. What this means is that over the next year or two, we'll have tooling out there that let ordinary users have like multi-sig wallets where they're like backup clauses, where if like coins don't move within a year, they have a dead man switch that like goes to a key in their lawyer's office or in their safe or whatever kind of thing. One big reason that we don't have that kind of tooling is that it's really hard to write the tooling. And when you do it, it's this really ad hoc thing, and then your users have to worry that like you, the code author, is going to stop maintaining it, and then they're going to lose their coins. And so Taproot makes this all a lot more flexible and generic.
And people don't feel very comfortable with very, very like customized personal scripts that they're going to be broadcasting on the blockchain, you know.
Yeah, privacy aspect as well.
Yeah, I mean, I could maintain this stuff myself, and I don't do this because it makes me uncomfortable to do. But with Taproot, then we'll be able to use just like off-the-shelf mini script code that will do this.
I thought another interesting thing that the current implementation would allow. Now, first, it's much more important, all the stuff we talked about, privacy and multisig and everything. But in the current implementation, Bitcoin addresses are actually public keys. Well, right now with ECDSA, they're public key hashes. And that allows a couple of interesting protocols where you can take, for example, someone else's public key and add a number, add a tweak, and you get another one of their public keys, which they know the private key for. So, for example, Adam came up with a protocol called Snicker, and that would have been really helpful if the entire blockchain had visible public keys. I think that's right, where you could then choose someone's address and then essentially send them a Snicker, like a Snicker CoinJoin, and they'd immediately be able to spend it without any interaction. Yeah. Or another cool example would be you could do like a proof that you own a certain amount of Bitcoin. So imagine that there's some chat room that's really important and exclusive, and you can only enter if you own 1 Bitcoin or 10 Bitcoins or something. You could do a really big ring signature of every public key on the blockchain, as long as it's higher than 1 Bitcoin, and then show that to people, and you'd prove it without revealing what your actual coin was. So these are fun to think about, but they're not, the multi-signature and privacy thing is way more actually important.
Yeah, I mean, even if the Snicker example is just one little idea and maybe not very practical, debatable, the general concept is important, isn't it? Because if you can tweak things from the public realm, it changes what kind of protocols can be built. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, there could be something in future that, like, this is it's quite a common building block, and there could be someone who invents a really cool protocol in the future which uses this, and then we'd be really happy that we have this with Schnorr, with Taproot.
I think, to be fair, we should address the quantum elephant in the room, right? Andrew, go ahead, because I know you love talking about this.
I love it. Yeah, so there is a true fact about our universe is that it is possible with a quantum computer to break ECDSA and to break Schnorr and to break all of the compact zero-knowledge proofs that we know about and to break RSA and SSL and all of the protocols that we use in our daily lives to interact with the world over computer networks. So there is an argument that Bitcoin outputs, which currently hide the ECDSA key material behind a hash, would be protected from a quantum computer. Because one thing quantum computers can't do is efficiently come up with hash preimages. So if a key is behind a hash, the quantum computer can't tell what the key is, and therefore it can't forge a signature for the key, is the thinking. So in Taproot, we no longer hide the key behind a hash. We just have like a raw key there that you can sign with, which means that any Taproot outputs in the presence of a quantum computer could just be taken by the quantum computer. And so I have a couple of thoughts about this. So this is some concern that sometimes people bring up in that. So earlier I said Taproot does not change the security model. People sometimes argue, well, we are changing the security model against quantum computers. And the thing is, this isn't really true for a couple of unfortunate reasons. The big one being that there is a lot of address use on the network. It turns out that something like 50-60% of all Bitcoins are held in addresses right now where it is public knowledge what the key behind the hash is. The reason being that address had been used in the past and it's spent from. Another thing is that there are actually a lot of old outputs from before block like 80,000 or so, which didn't even have the hash. The hash was actually an invention after Bitcoin had been deployed. So the combination of these two things mean that some like 60% of the value in the network is already exposed to quantum computers, even without Taproot making any further moves to make these keys be visible. And so,
unconfirmed transactions as well, right? Exposing keys.
Right.
Low.
Yeah. And so the other, that's a bit of a more general thing, actually, which is that software does not treat these keys as secret data right now. So if you have a signed but unconfirmed transaction, that will reveal your key. If you have a PSBT that isn't even signed, that will have your key in it. If you are deriving your keys with BIP32, chances are your wallet will give up the BIP32 keys even without any additional authentication because you're just asking it for keys. And wallet software developers don't think of revealing keys as being a security problem. And so the actual number of Bitcoins exposed by this in practice is probably much higher. I would swag, it's difficult to estimate this, but it would arguably include everybody using BIP32, which is almost everybody. It would arguably include everyone using PSBT, which is increasingly lots of people. It would include anybody using multisig, right? Because through a multisig, you have to reveal your keys to your counterparties. Basically, it just isn't. So I have two claims. So one is like currently there's basically no protection on these hashes anyway. And then my second claim would be even if you did have this hash, that it wouldn't actually do a whole lot for you. But that's a bit of a more technical argument about like how in practice would you actually use this quantum protection to let you keep your keys. But I think that whole discussion is moot because basically all of the value in the network would be stealable by a quantum computer. And then that's it. I mean, like, whoops, we whoopsed, right?
You guys, this has been an awesome conversation so far, and I don't want it to end, but we do have kind of a time limit here, and we're getting close to it, and I want to talk about activation. So like Andrew said, Taproot getting merged in today does not mean there's a path to activation or that anything has been selected there. So why don't we talk about like the state of activation and that dialogue, and maybe you guys can give your opinions on which way you think will happen or what you support, something like that. Let's start with Chris.
All right. So activation is this process where every node on the network at the same time agrees to start enforcing these rules. And that obviously means all of us as users need to agree when to do it and how to do it and so on. Now, there's a couple of different ideas. You can have a activation where the miners have a signal they tell everyone, like at the flag day when everyone says go, on your marks, get set, go, enforce now. You can tell the miners to do that, or we could have the client itself, the Bitcoin Core client, does that with the agreement of the developers and everything, or a few other ways. And then there's discussion of whether it should be in 3 months or in 6 months or in 2 years. And they so kind of there's a few issues here. So people have rightly said that if it takes too long, you could get into a situation where people really throw up their hands and just don't feel like waiting anymore. I don't know, if, for example, it took 10 years to get Taproot, that would probably be quite negative for everyone. But then on the other hand, if the activation timeout to get it was very short, there could be not enough time for everyone to update. And then there's the thing, if you have miners, like be the coordinating people, that's something that everyone can agree on because there's a consensus protocol. But then the miners themselves may end up intentionally stopping the activation happening, like they did at the time with SegWit. So there's a few issues here. Now, I don't suppose there's much point saying my point of view, which is it's just that you have to find a way to balance these trade-offs. So I suppose I'd be fine with anything as long as we eventually get Taproot, really. So as long as if everyone else agrees on something, I'll go along with that.
Who wants to jump off of that?
Could we maybe just for those? I mean, after all, it's been years. Not everyone was deeply enmeshed in the insanity of 2017, right?
Yeah.
So there'll be concepts which I think a few viewers slash listeners won't be aware of. Like we have already had a mention of soft fork, but it's kind of crucial to this discussion, isn't it? Right? That basically in a soft fork we tighten the rules of consensus, which paradoxically, when the first time you've never thought about this, it sounds the wrong way around, but it's not the wrong way around. If you tighten the rules, it means that old nodes that haven't upgraded to the new rules will still think everything that they see is valid anyway. And so it effectively it's a kind of a what's what I call it's called soft. It's an easier form of upgrade for the whole sort of community of users of the software to deal with, because if you happen to be a bit slow in upgrading, it won't necessarily affect you. But the sort of nuance with Bitcoin as opposed to other kinds of software is that we have these things called miners, and they're the ones responsible for creating an ordered set of transactions that everyone agrees on, as that's the order of transactions. And so they themselves do have to be upgraded. The people who are creating blocks have to actually be following the right set of rules, because if they're not and they create blocks with transactions invalid according to this new rule set, then they'll be forked off and they'll lose money. So that's a very big oversimplification, but that's the kind of ground rules for what we're dealing with here. And then the question is, how do we go about this process of upgrading specifically the mining nodes, but of course also all the other nodes as soon as possible?
Aaron, do you want to add on to that a little bit, since you've kind of been covering the soft fork process in Bitcoin for quite a while?
Not really. I think the explanation so far has been good. So there's sort of the factors that are being discussed is whether or not there should be automated activation after the sort of signaling period, at which point nodes that have implemented the code will automatically activate a soft fork. So that's the UASF. And then the other factor is how long should it take, or how fast should it go? And that's I think that's the gist of the discussion, these two sort of possibilities. And yeah, there's different opinions, and it doesn't look like there's a consensus yet. I guess the other thing is whether it should be embedded in Bitcoin Core itself, or maybe in an alternative client, like the BIP 148 USF did. That was like a forked version of Bitcoin Core, which then implemented the activation code. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I think you all gave a good summary of what's going on, and that this is ultimately a social issue. So I don't have any additional information about like there becoming a consensus. I think Aaron actually probably knows more than all of us, because he's keeping an eye on the actual news, on current events here, instead of just thinking. So I can tell you what my opinion is. Actually, my opinion and what I think will happen are actually pretty similar. I think that by the end of this year, we will actually have a consensus on what to do, figuring out what these parameters look like, and so on. I think that probably we will decide that the activation should just happen automatically in core at some sort of time, at some specific date, assuming that there is sufficient uptake of it. That would be by the end of 2021, but certainly like far into the second half of 2021. We would need several months, at least 6, maybe more than 12, hopefully not more than 12. Now, so suppose though that Core came up with that. Core is like, here's our proposal, like we're gonna just like activate it in 10 months. Would people think that's too long? Should we go fork our own client and do like a UASF? I would jump onto that. I mean, I'd be
There's an argument about timescales, right? But I think maybe we could just briefly tell people what the general BIP8 idea is. That might, I mean, obviously we go into great detail. This is BIP9. This is what happened before BIP9. Yeah. This is how SegWit works. There's so much crap. This is BIP 148. But at least if we explain what BIP8 is, maybe Chris. Yeah, I think you've been involved in the discussion a bit, haven't you, Chris? Maybe. Or
yeah. So BIP8 is essentially you have a block height. It's a block height that we say is 2 weeks from now, and after that block height, if any of the miners, so if it works like this, if in the last roughly 2,000 blocks, 95% of the miners say that they will enforce Taproot, then the soft fork would just happen. Then all the nodes on the network will start enforcing it. And then BIP8 also has a parameter, which is if at the end of this, so I said the period starts in 2 weeks, that period will go on for, it could be a parameter, but let's say 1 year. At the end of that 1 year, which could be anything, could be 6 months or 2 years or something, at the end of the period, will the soft fork activate anyway, even if the miners haven't said they'll enforce it, or will it stop activating? Will it time out in a way, and Taproot won't be enforced? So there's 2 parameters there, which is how long is this period, and whether at the end of the period will Taproot be enforced, even if the miners try to stop it. Hopefully that was a good enough explanation.
Yeah, and then you can have all sort of weird dynamics, like, for example, Bitcoin Core would implement something that takes, I don't know, a year and doesn't enforce activation after a year, but then someone else forks the Bitcoin Core client and has a forced activation after 50 weeks or something like that, and then you get a UASF sort of situation. All these kinds of things are possible, and I don't think we're anywhere near consensus on this, as far as I know. It's just, there's a bunch of different ideas been thrown around, and now you wait. I don't know.
So I was thinking about this today, and I decided my opinion. Maybe I think it's a slightly unorthodox or unpopular opinion, but my opinion, after consideration, was that maybe we should effectively do as close as possible to what we did last time, even though that was a catastrophic failure. Well, it wasn't complete. In a way, my point is that it wasn't a catastrophic failure, right? Because it failed in its original design. It didn't. I mean, we ended up with miners using this signaling mechanism, which we should explain to people if they didn't get this point yet. The signaling mechanism is miners basically flip a bit somewhere in the blocks that they're mining. And the idea was that it signals that they are ready for the upgrade. It's not, but what they took it, or some of them anyway, took it to mean is that we're using this to vote on whether we like this upgrade or not. Whereas in fact, quorum miners are not actually users of Bitcoin and have no say whatsoever in the validation rules. But anyway, go back to this philosophical argument. But my feeling was that because this is a very sensitive topic, and because I think especially Bitcoin core developers and people like that especially, they're engineers fundamentally. They don't really want to become political actors in this regard, and I'm very sympathetic to that. That I heard many of them express that sentiment. That in a way we should be almost passive as possible. And in the end, what resolved the great crisis of 2017 was a user movement. It wasn't the developers deciding something, and so perhaps effectively it becomes almost a very fine, delicate argument, because BIP8 with certain parameters is actually BIP9, basically. So maybe we do BIP8, but we kind of do it. We effectively do what we did last time, and effectively, if I recall correctly, it was like a 1 year timeout, and basically there was a long time during which the argument, such as it was, brewed, and maybe this time there won't be any argument, and it'll just all go through quite smoothly. And I suspect that will happen, but the fallback of BIP 148 type events still exists anyway in that scenario. So that's my opinion.
I would like to pose a scenario to you guys. Andrew mentioned that he potentially could be interested in jumping onto something similar to a UASF BIP1, alternative alternative client activation method. If that was something, if someone was like, hey, we're gonna Leroy Jenkins this, we're gonna activate this thing outside of core. Like, what would it take? What conditions would it take for you to feel comfortable to run that code and to say, I'm going to support this movement as well? Let's start with Andrew, since you kind of mentioned that you would be interested in that.
Sure. Well, to be comfortable running the code, that's actually fairly straightforward. You could look at the diff of the code. For something like this, where ultimately the UASF would look like just changing a couple numbers, you wouldn't even need to know how to program, really, to check. You just look at the diff. It would be like 3 different numbers or 3 different numbers, basically, is what the difference would look like. Although then I guess you have to figure out how to build that and then to actually run that code. It would be much harder than reviewing it. Now, as for what the parameters would have to be, I'm going to be kind of conservative here. Well, that's an interesting. There are two questions. Right? What would it take me to like jump onto such a thing, and what would it take me to like do such a thing? Like,
yeah, I'm talking more about like the community aspect, or like what would the Bitcoin community need to be like saying, and what would this group need to be doing for you to feel comfortable?
Yeah, what I would need to see is widespread philosophical support and like sincere intention of people to pile onto this from a diversity of people. And what I mean by that is that I wouldn't want to see like one particular political faction say, like no matter how large they were, if there's some specific political faction that was going to do this, then I would view that as maybe a risk that faction is just going to fork off a network. Whereas if I saw like a smattering of people who represented wallet developers and miners and exchanges and people doing infrastructure work and just like unaffiliated Bitcoin users and people doing privacy tech and academics and so on. If I saw that kind of attitude, and if the parameters were not too crazy, right? If there was like a UASF that was like, let's have Taproot in 2 weeks, I'm not gonna jump onto that no matter. I mean, I'm gonna wait that out, no matter what support I see. But assuming that these are reasonable parameters, you know, there's something like Adam said 50 weeks out. Maybe I could do less than 50, but not a lot less. Then that would be basically what it would take is a wide, like a political diversity of plausible intention to join in.
So I think on this topic, we might be slightly getting a bit ahead of ourselves because there's an effect I've come across where people always fight the last war, in a sense. They think about what happened the last time this kind of thing was going on and say it'll be the same now. And just for context, when SegWit was being activated, it was on the back of a 2 or 3 year long, essentially a schism, a fight within the Bitcoin community. So on all the forums on IRC, there'd be debates every single day with like, you know, really harsh language, and all the Bitcoin meetups, people come along and argue, and it went on for months and months and years.
Chris, don't stop talking. PTSD.
Yeah, and SegWit then was come up with partly as a solution to this kind of internal conflict, and that is why there was this whole drama of UASF and stuff. And right now for Taproot, nothing even similar exists at all. Like as far as I can tell, everyone just loves Taproot, and no one has any problem with it at all. So this kind of talk of, oh, should we hop onto another client or should we do this other stuff, I think is really premature. I mean, I'd probably hop on as well, but I don't think we'll need anything like that at all. Everyone just, I don't know, have you met anyone who even, you know, doesn't like Taproot for any... Everyone just seems to love it from my point of view.
I agree. And I mean, I said as much, and I don't think I was the only one back in 2017 or 2018, whenever it was, everyone was asking this question, oh, is Schnorr going to be as bad? I mean, it's just not the same scenario for the reasons you've perfectly well elucidated. And that's part of the reason why I think I'm seeing people, I mean, I hate to say it because it's not fair for me to say this, but I think people are over-engineering here. And for this philosophical reason you've just described, that's the reason why they're over-engineering. And I think we should basically go with what we had before, which is maybe, again, a controversial opinion, even though maybe it has limitations. But I don't think we need to get involved in massively over-engineering this.
Awesome, guys. Well, we are getting to the end of our time here. So I guess I'll give the floor to you guys for one last time to give a last word and plug where people can find you if you want people to be reaching out to you for any reason. Let's go with Andrew, and then Adam, and then Chris.
Yep. So I am Andy Toshi on IRC on Freenode. That's probably the most effective way to find me. I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on Facebook or Instagram. I am on LinkedIn, but I'm not going to respond to your invitation for. I check LinkedIn about once a year, and I just did it 2 months ago. So it's not going to happen. So yeah, Andy Toshi on IRC. Definitely the best thing. Or if you're in Austin and you can get a hold of Justin Moon and get him to invite me to the Austin BitDevs meetups, then I will show up and you can meet me there. So, no.
Justin, hang out with Andrew, man. All right, Adam.
So what is it now? Waxwing on Freenode. There's I've recently half resurrected my blog, joinmarket.me/blog, or just joinmarket.me. You'll find all the stuff there. I'm on Mastodon, X0F, no, but Waxwing anyway on Mastodon. Anyway, you can find my stuff in various places. Yeah, I do JoinMarket software. Yeah.
All right, Chris. Last but not least.
Yeah. So I'm a Belcher on Freenode IRC as well, and I'm in the JoinMarket channel and the Bitcoin channel. I'm also on Twitter, and you can send me a private message if you like. Or what else? Right now I'm working on CoinSwap, which I hope will be the next, like the new paradigm of Bitcoin privacy, and you can find that on. So I've got a website, bitcoinprivacy.me, with the docs there. You can read that. I think it'll be quite cool. Yeah, that's all I think.
All right. Well, if that's all, I'll sign out for Bitcoin Magazine on behalf of Aaron and myself. Thank you so much for everyone who watched. Thank you so much to the panelists who joined. And yeah, really exciting stuff in Bitcoin's future. It feels like every single day now there's something new, whether it's technical, whether it's social, whether it's financial. Bitcoin keeps advancing, and it's just super exciting. So take care out there, all the new Bitcoiners, and thanks again for